In today's video, this trashed dresser gets made into this moody beauty. If you want to see the process, stick around. Hello everyone, welcome or welcome back. This is Sab's Rehabs, where I take old, outdated, and often damaged furniture and turn it into something beautiful again. I found this antique dresser listed on Facebook Marketplace and I talked him down to $30, although I think I should have gotten it for free. But you can see that it has water damage. The veneer is completely cracking all over. The finish is failing. I think that there might be some mold on this piece. When I went to go pick it up, it was sitting underneath a tarp outside, so I don't know how long it's been in the elements. It's definitely in very sad shape, but still has really good bones, so there is a lot of potential here. So I'm going to put in some elbow grease, a little bit of creative thinking, and see what artistic look I can come up with for this piece. This dresser has some pretty unique handles, and luckily I am fortunate that all of them are there, so I do decide to keep the original hardware. Typically I start my pieces off by cleaning them, but there's no point in cleaning this because a lot of this veneer is going to come off. It is already peeling off so easily, so I go around with a scraper and I just try to pull up all the loose pieces that I can first. Today's video is also part of the Unique Antique Challenge here on YouTube that is hosted by the Crafty Creech and co-hosted by LaVintage Decor. I will make sure to tag them in my description. Also include the playlist for all the other furniture flippers that are participating in this as well will be in the description, and I will pop up a little video icon at the end of my video to the playlist if you just want to click on that and watch all the other artists next. After prying up all the loose veneer that I could, you can see that there is some veneer still stuck here that has some super strong, it has to be like Superman adhesive. It would not come off. So to help loosen that veneer up, I put an extremely damp cloth down on top, let that soak for about 15 minutes, and then it came back with my scraper and pried it up. This was a little bit of elbow grease and work, but I did eventually get all the veneer off the top of this piece. Now, after all the veneer removal, it does need to be cleaned, and there is a spot here that looks like mold. Now, it was really windy. I'm in Oklahoma. It's a very windy state, and it was so windy it kept knocking my camera stand over. So I did not film this part, but I did scrub this piece down with a bleach and water mixture, and then came back with a water hose and rinsed it off and then let it dry. Next is to address this failing finish. When you paint pieces of furniture, typically you scuff sand the previous finish. You don't necessarily have to remove the old finish off. In this case, it is failing everywhere, and that is an adhesion issue. So I do need to go ahead and remove all of this old finish. So I use my carbide scraper with the different head things on it to scrape off all the areas. And then eventually I went to sanding. So I scraped and sanded this piece for a couple hours, but I eventually got all the old finish off of this piece. The top two drawers, I removed all of the veneer, but on the bottom three larger drawers, the veneer was still pretty intact, just a couple large chunks that were missing. So I Bondo filled those areas, let it dry, and then sanded it smooth. So it was nice, one flat surface. Often with antiques, you can get cracks or gaps in between the pieces in the structure of the furniture. So My way just to make that look more new and not so old and I guess gappy, I use a paintable silicone and just applied a B along the crack, and then I come back with a wet finger and just use my finger to swipe all the excess silicone off. And when you paint it, you get a nice smooth look. The Unique Antique Challenge has a theme and it is vintage tattoo. I will go into a little bit detail later explaining the idea behind this challenge. The last little bit of sanding is to hand sand with some 120 grit sandpaper all the areas that my sander could not reach, and then I wipe the entire piece down with a damp lint-free cloth to remove any dust residue. When I picked this piece of furniture up, it was sitting on the ground in a field covered by a tarp, and I thought about adding feet to it, but I couldn't find any that I really liked, so I decided to tack in these plastic furniture glides to lift this piece up off the floor so it didn't have to sit on the ground anymore. The last thing to do is to make sure that the drawers slide in and out well before I move on to the next step. There was one drawer that was a little stuck, so I just sanded the side of the drawer a little bit more, and then it was good to go. I prefer to spray my pieces of furniture whenever I can, so to protect the drawers from overspray and get a nice clean line, I like to tape the sides and across the opening. For primer today, I am using Rust-Oleum's primer in gray, and I spray 2 coats on this, allowing it to dry in between each coat. Now, this piece is an antique. Typically, I like to seal those in with shellac because antiques are notorious for being bleeders, and shellac is the strongest primer, but I don't have any in stock. And I have this, and it's an oil base, so it's the second strongest primer out there. So fingers crossed, I hope that this one works and I don't get any bleed through. I have this beautiful decoupage paper that I'm going to put on the front of some of the drawers. So I mix together paints. I use grays and browns, trying to find the perfect combination to get the color match for this decoupage paper. After playing around a bit, I think I got a pretty good match. Next, I load the paint up in my 3M AccuSpray cup, water it down to about 23% so it will spray nicely through my gun. Since I prefer to spray my pieces and I like using chalk paint because it's paint that is actually made for furniture pieces, chalk paint can be pricey, so I typically use Behr chalk paint. That's my go-to paint. And I apply 2 coats of the Behr chalk paint, allowing it to dry a couple hours in between each coat. This challenge is vintage tattoo themed to help promote peace, tolerance, and respect in this furniture flipping community. I do occasionally get comments on my tattoos, but for the most part, comments regarding my tattoos are not very nice comments at all. Here are a few examples of the type of comments that I do get on my channels regarding my tattoos. While I do appreciate all my subscribers and followers and the love and support that the majority of you do spread, I do not, however, appreciate any hateful comments regarding my hair, my tattoos, or my physical appearance. Those just really aren't tolerated. We have a few sayings here in the South to help those that may be confused what's acceptable to say and what's not. If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it at all. And for those of you who still don't get it after that, We have a second saying here in the South that is, well, bless your little pea picking heart. And that's all I have to say about that. When people get tattoos, typically they'll get some kind of writing, or females, males can too as well, I guess, often get flowers. So I found this very beautiful vintage flower with writing decoupage paper. So I decided that was the perfect touch for this vintage tattoo inspired dresser. When I do decoupage papers, I like to take the drawer out and mark the middle of the drawer. You can mark the middle of your decoupage paper as well, but usually in the package it's folded in half, so there's a crease along where the middle of the paper is. I lay the paper down, I center up to the middle of the drawer, and then I mark all four corners and take some scissors and trim around the four corners that I marked, making sure I leave a little bit of extra paper, so I cut outside my pencil lines to give myself a little room to play with when I actually glue this to the front of the drawer. Decoupage papers come in a couple different sizes, and these drawers were an odd measurement in length, so I ended up having to go with a piece of decoupage paper that was way larger than my drawer, so I had to trim a lot of excess paper away. Before attaching the paper, I check one last time for placement to make sure I'm happy, and then I'm using Min Wax polyacrylic here to glue this to the front of the drawers. I work in sections, especially since these are very large drawers, and I apply some of the polyacrylic down first and then place the paper down, smooth it over with my hand to smooth out any air bubbles and creases. I continue with this process, working in sections, laying down the polyacrylic and then smoothing the paper down until I get the entire piece of decoupage paper laid down on the front of the drawer. Okay, back to my preferred concentration on all the positive that I get on my channel. Thank you to all the followers and the nice comments and suggestions that you guys do make. And I want to also give a special shout out and thank you to those who have supported my channel. So thank you, Patricia, for buying me that Tree of Life stencil off my Amazon wishlist. And also a special shout out and thank you to Personal Wine Lady and Charlene Logan for buying me a coffee off the Buy Me a Coffee app. Thank you so much. Okay, back to the decoupage paper. Once you have it completely on, you have to go back over with a top layer of the polyacrylic to seal it into place. So think of sandwiching. You're going to do a layer of polyacrylic, the decoupage paper, and then a layer of polyacrylic on top. And then I let that dry overnight. The next morning, I wrap some 150 grit sandpaper over an old sanding sponge. I hold it at a 45-degree angle and swipe in a downward motion to knock off the excess remaining decoupage paper that's hanging over the edges. And I go around all four corners of all three drawers that have the decoupage paper on it. Before top coat, I go over the painted areas with a 400 grit sanding sponge just to get a super smooth surface, and then wipe the dust away with a lint-free cloth. I also poked holes in the decoupage paper where the handles will go, so I have a way to slide the drawers in and out whenever I go to spray the top coat. For top coat, I'm using that same Min Wax polyacrylic. I loaded it up in my 3M AccuSpray gun, and I sprayed 2 coats, allowing the polyacrylic to dry a couple hours in between each coat. In case anyone noticed, when I started spraying the piece with the primer, I didn't have the top two drawers in the piece. And that is because my original plan was to do a paint wash on those, which I did, but I did not end up liking the paint wash on the top drawers. So I painted those and then put them in and just sprayed them with the rest of the dresser. You know, sometimes we try things and they just end up not working out the way that we wanted them to or thought that they would, and that's okay. Speaking along those lines, the color of this paint ended up being more gray and I just see more brown in the paper, so I'm going to have to fix that to make it flow together better. From this camera angle, you can really see the color difference between the paint and the decoupage paper. There's just way more brown in the paper. So I'm using dark wax. This is bare decorative wax, and I apply a coat on that. Now, if you have not worked with dark wax before, here are a few tips. You want to add some kind of clear coat first, which I did with a polyacrylic. Now, if you're working with waxes, you can use wax, clear wax first and then the dark. But in this case, I use polyacrylic and then the dark wax on top. Put a layer down, and then this is very fine grade steel wool that I'm just using light pressure here to swipe. So I'm wiping away all the excess dark wax that's on there and giving it a more blended look. I did not add the dark wax over the decoupage paper, but I did go over all the painted surfaces. Dark wax is a great way to add an antiquing or an age look to your pieces. And also with that oil-based primer, I did have a spot, one on each side, that still had bleed through. So this dark wax added more depth and dimension to this piece and did a fantastic job covering up the tiny spot of bleed through that I spotted. I didn't point the bleed through spot out in my video because I knew I was going to figure out a way to cover it. And if I can't see where it's at anymore, I'm sure you can't either. For the rusty hardware, I place them in a boiling pot of white vinegar and water. I do a 50-50 mixture, let them boil for 10 minutes. And then while they're still hot, I pull them out with tongs and use some fine grade steel wool and put in some elbow grease and scrub them. This hack trick works so amazing. It works every single time, and the difference between a clean one and a dirty one is absolutely phenomenal. After the handles were finished, I did go ahead and put them on the piece. And typically whenever I add the handles back to a piece, that's my signature of I am done. But with this piece, I did still have a little bit more work left to do, but I promise you we're almost done. So we're coming to an end of wrapping up the transformation of this piece. To give this moody girl a little bit of shimmer, I grab my white gold gilding wax and use my finger, just apply a small amount to the trim here piece on the bottom, and then the top two drawers I run around the trim on all four sides just to add a little extra bling and beauty to this piece. I've been concentrating so much on the outside of this piece, I forgot the inside of the drawers. For the three big drawers, I just cleaned them and did Howard feed and wax, but the top two little drawers are a different story. They have so much damage on the inside of these drawers. So I grab my carbide scraper and just scrape off this old finish on the bottom of the drawers. Then I clean them up and seal them with that same polyacrylic. Now, to add a little something extra, this is a beautiful rose hair tattooed girl stencil that I had in stock. So I grabbed that white gilding wax and filled the stencil. That is a piece of a top coat sponge that I'm using it to apply. And it just adds a little extra nice, beautiful surprise in the top drawers whenever you open them. All right, finally, now we're to the very last step, and that is to buff all the wax that I have applied to this piece. These are spit up rags that I got that I think make the perfect buffing rags. So I just put that towel on there and go in swipes and circular motions, and I buff it, and then this piece is finally done. Here is a quick reminder of the sad state that this girl came to me in, and then what she looks like now. This little lady is no longer an abused antique. She is moody, she is beautiful, and she is one of a kind custom. A very special thank you again to the Crafty Creech and the Vintage Decor for hosting this amazing challenge. I hope you guys enjoyed this furniture transformation. There are other artists in this challenge, so make sure you check out that playlist. That is all I have for you today. Until next time.